there was a time when it was plowing cotton, and we had an old mule. His name was Tom. Oh, and he just had one good eye, and he was a pretty good old mule, a good work mule, but he was mean, and he'd kick you if you got around on his blind side and made a noise. Well, he would kick, and I was scared of him. I don't want that thing kicking me, and so I was hooking him up to the plows to go to work one day after lunch, and I'd start to hitch old Tom's traces, and he'd move, and I'd jump back, and kept doing that, and Dad hollered at me to get that team going. Well, I start to hitch old Tom, and he'd make him a little move, and I'd jump back. Didn't get him hitched. And about the third time that Dad yelled at me to get that team going, I hadn't got him hitched yet. And so finally he said, "What's the matter? You haven't got..." And I said, "I'm afraid he's going to kick me." And he said, "Well, get down there and hitch him and get going." And I said, "Well, you hitch him yourself." Well, I shouldn't have said that, but right at the time, I was more scared of the mule than I was Dad. But I looked around and saw him coming, and he picked up a broken neck yoke. It's a piece of neck yoke that goes across the front of the wagon tongue, hitched to the harness of the horses or mules, and it had been broken, and it had a ring and a hook on one end. And he picked that up, and I thought, well, I'd better get going. So I took off. Just as I went around the corner of the barn, that piece of neck yoke hit that barn, and kabang! If it had hit Willie Joe, he wouldn't have been around probably to tell this story. Anyway, he hooked old Tom up and told me to get on that plow and go to work. So and don't come in till I call you. Well, I plowed till it was too dark to see the cotton, and he finally called me and told me to come on in. Harder on the team than it was on me. There's one incident that happened that was kind of odd and scary. It was Dad got a hold of an old Army rifle, World War I, and he kept it around the house. I remember seeing it hanging on the wall, and he never could find any ammunition for it, so he just kept it sort of as a souvenir. But one time he found some bullets, and he wanted to try out that old gun and see how accurate it was. Well, we had an outhouse that was about 50 yards south of the house, and one of those two-holers. And so one morning, he got his old gun down, and us kids had all started to school, and we'd walk down the mailbox it was about 100 yards, I guess, to where the road turned and where our mailbox was. And he said, "I'm going down with you to the mailbox. I'm going to see how accurate this old gun shoots." And so he had made him a circle out on the outhouse wall. And so we got out there and we was going to watch him. And so he pulled up and he blasted that old gun, and Mom walked out of the outhouse scared to death. She looked around, didn't know what was happening, and Dad thought he had shot her, and he ran. First time I ever saw my dad run that fast, but he threw that old gun down and took off and got down there to see if she had been hit. And that bullet went through that outhouse right under the seat where Mom was, and into the sandbank on the other side. Well, he never did shoot that gun again. So that could have been another disaster, but it worked out all right. Another time that was kind of foolish of me, but it was funny at the time for me, but I wouldn't think it being funny at all now, because it was foolish. I was hunting rabbits in a plum thicket, a wild plum thicket down on the creek, and had a little .22 rifle. And there was a black lady fishing over on the other side of the creek, and she was sitting on a 5-gallon can and had a sunbonnet on, and she couldn't see me. And so I thought, well, how fun it would be if I just shoot her bobber. And so I aimed at it, pulled the trigger, and I hit that bobber, and that lady went climbing the bank to get out of there, hollering, "Oh Lordy, oh Lordy!" And she climbed out and looked around, and of course I was long gone. Besides, I was in this plum thicket. She couldn't see me, but I didn't ever tell anybody about that, because if my dad had found it out, I'd have never shot that .22 rifle again. Besides that, I'd have got my behind busted. But it was funny when it happened, but it was something I shouldn't have done. Guess I need to tell you a fish story. After the war, I was home and lived in Tracy. Jack used to fish a lot, so he and I and Red Huntley, we called him Brick. He worked at the ice cream plant, and Don Carpenter, we went fishing, and we got on a peat moss island out kind of in the mouth of the Sacramento River. And we pulled up to that island and got out of the boat and was fishing off the island. Well, about the first bite I got, I caught a big old catfish. And Jack said, "Oh, we don't want catfish. We're after striped bass." I said, "Well, I'll get you one." So I baited up and got out there again, and I got a bite, and I hooked into something. Boy, I had a big pull, and I was playing it around that island and got it up to the shore, and old Brick Huntley, he was going to gaff him for me, because we saw it was a big fish. But he got a gaff hook, and I had 2 hooks on my leader, and the fish was on the bottom hook, and so I got him up in the tulies there, and old Brick, he went over to gaff him, and he reached around and caught a hold of some tulies, and they gave way, and he fell in right on top of the fish. And as he went down, he reached out and he grabbed that empty hook, and it hooked him right in the thumb. And he was yelling, and I didn't know what was wrong with him, because I was holding on to that fish. Well, I had him and the fish both. He was 160, and the fish weighed 38 pounds. Trying to get him up. So I hollered for Jack, and he came over, and he got a hold of Brick, and we brought that fish and old Brick out at the same time. That was the big catch of the day, 38-pound striper.